by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
The room fell silent before Camilla reached the final paragraph. Hidden for years inside the late Queen Elizabeth's private archive, a sealed letter had finally been released by the palace, and its message struck directly at the future Camilla believed had already been secured. This was not a ceremonial note or a gesture of approval. It was a carefully worded boundary from the woman whose judgment still shaped the crown from beyond the grave. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She read the sentence again, then lowered the page. The letter declared that she could stand beside Charles and support his reign, but she must never hold independent authority over the crown, the succession, or the sovereign's duties. The succession meant the legal order deciding who inherits the throne, while sovereign duties were the official responsibilities of the monarch. This was no minor restriction. It drew a line around her future. Charles remained near the fireplace, silent and rigid. He wanted to comfort her, yet every word carried his mother's handwriting. The document had been sealed inside the royal archives, the secure collection where the monarchy preserves private papers, with orders that it be opened only after he became king and Camilla's public role was established. Elizabeth had waited until acceptance seemed complete before revealing where trust still ended. Camilla looked toward him and asked whether he had known. The question was quiet, but it cut through the room. Charles admitted that he knew a sealed instruction existed, though he had never seen its full wording. She heard the difference. He had been warned. She had not. After surviving years of public rejection, she now discovered that the deepest limit on her position had been hidden inside the family for many years. Then the final revelation appeared in the margin. A handwritten note directed senior courtiers to consult Princess Anne and Prince William whenever Camilla's duties approached constitutional or succession matters. Constitutional matters were decisions tied to how the monarchy legally functions, not family preference. Elizabeth had separated being accepted as Charles's wife from being trusted as a guardian of the institution. Anne and William had been placed between those two worlds. Camilla's devastation hardened into suspicion. If Charles knew the letter existed, who else had prepared for this moment? How long had Anne been waiting to enforce it? But before Camilla could confront the family members named in the letter, she first had to face the painful truth about what each of them stood to gain, or lose, from Elizabeth's final boundary. Behind the palace announcement stood 4 people carrying 4 very different wounds. Camilla saw the letter as a rejection, arriving at the moment she believed acceptance was complete. Charles saw it as one final command from the mother he had spent a lifetime trying to satisfy. Anne viewed it as a duty that could not be ignored, while William understood that protecting the future crown might require hurting his father in the present. Camilla sat alone after the briefing and slowly removed the ring from her finger. She placed it on the table, stared at it, and asked whether decades of loyalty had still left her outside Elizabeth's circle of trust. Her rise had demanded years of public service, controlled appearances, and painful patience. Charles had fought to secure recognition for the woman he loved, yet the private letter proved that acceptance inside the monarchy had never meant complete authority within it. Charles entered without speaking. The queen consort looked toward him, waiting for the reassurance he had always given before, but none came. His hesitation hurt more than the palace announcement because it suggested that he understood his mother's reasoning. Camilla asked whether he believed the boundary was fair. The king lowered his eyes, and that silence became an answer she could not ignore. Anne carried a different burden. As Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, she had spent her life placing duty ahead of comfort. She did not celebrate Camilla's pain, but she believed royal authority had to remain tied to constitutional responsibility rather than marriage or emotional loyalty. William shared that concern. As heir, meaning the person next in line to inherit the throne, he knew that every temporary decision could shape the powers of his future reign. William had already seen a confidential summary of the letter during a private succession briefing. A documented account of that meeting showed that he had not been given the full wording, only the warning that Camilla's role must never expand into independent control. The prince had carried that knowledge in silence, knowing it might one day place him against his father. Anne possessed something even more dangerous. Inside her private papers rested a sealed memorandum explaining how Elizabeth expected the restriction to be enforced if Charles became too emotionally involved to act impartially. The memorandum, a formal written instruction, gave her authority to challenge any duty that crossed the late monarch's boundary. Camilla realized the letter was not merely a judgment from the past. Anne and William had been prepared to defend it in the present. Charles now stood between his wife, his children, and his mother's final command. But the deepest wound had begun years earlier. To understand why the late queen drew such a hard line, the palace had to return to the single ceremony that transformed her private concern into an irreversible decision. The warning did not begin with a constitutional crisis or a public scandal. It began during a memorial service at St. George's Chapel, when a seemingly minor change to the royal order exposed a struggle over status that Elizabeth could no longer dismiss. One chair had been moved, one instruction quietly challenged, and one expression on the late queen's face convinced those nearby that the incident would carry consequences far beyond that solemn afternoon. Anne noticed the change before anyone dared explain it. Her chair had been shifted behind Camilla's place in the formal royal order, the fixed arrangement showing rank and responsibility during official ceremonies. She gripped its back and asked the nearest courtier who had authorized the move. A few feet away, the queen consort remained still, knowing the request had come from her office and understanding exactly what the change suggested. Camilla had been told it was a small adjustment, nothing more than recognition of her position beside Charles. Yet placing her ahead of the Princess Royal suggested that marriage could outrank lifelong service and direct royal duty. Anne saw more than furniture. She saw a precedent, a new example, that could later be used to justify greater influence. The trusted daughter repeated her question, and the silence around her became heavier. Elizabeth entered before an answer came. The monarch looked once at the altered arrangement, then ordered the chair returned to its original place. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. That calm made the correction more severe. Camilla felt the humiliation immediately as the queen walked past without acknowledging her, while Anne released the chair but did not forget who had tried to move it. Charles learned of the incident soon afterward and defended the request during a recorded private conversation with his mother's secretary. He called it a harmless sign of respect toward his wife, not an attempt to rewrite royal authority. But Elizabeth heard danger in that defense. To her, affection had already begun softening boundaries that existed to protect the crown from personal pressure. That evening, the queen summoned her private secretary and dictated the first version of the letter. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages a monarch's official work and confidential instructions. Elizabeth stated that marriage to a sovereign must never rewrite the established chain of duty. She then ordered the document sealed until Charles had become king and Camilla's role had fully settled. Weeks later, Elizabeth added Anne and William by name. A documented account of that amendment explained that the princess would guard the present boundary, while the future king would protect it for the next reign. Camilla had seen only a chair move. The monarch had seen the beginning of something far larger. Years later, that hidden judgment returned with full force. Camilla now knew Anne had not merely witnessed the incident. She had been chosen because of it. And when the two women finally stood opposite each other without ceremony, courtiers, or distance between them, the old wound returned with devastating force. Camilla did not wait for another palace briefing. She crossed the private corridor and entered Anne's room carrying the letter in one hand. demanding to know how long the princess had understood what Elizabeth intended. No aids stood between them. No ceremony softened the exchange. For the first time, two women who had spent years maintaining public composure were forced to speak openly about trust, rank, loyalty, and the judgment of a dead queen. Camilla placed the letter on Anne's desk and refused to sit until she received an answer. The document gave the princess a direct advisory role over duties that the queen consort believed belonged within Charles's household. An advisory role meant the power to review and challenge decisions before they became established practice. To Camilla, that authority felt personal. To Anne, it was a responsibility she had never asked to carry. Anne closed the door and told her that she had known only what Elizabeth required her to know. She had not treated the instruction as a victory. She understood that enforcing it could wound Charles, damage his marriage, and divide the family around the future throne. Still, the princess would not pretend the burden had disappeared, simply because the truth was painful. Camilla leaned forward and asked whether Anne had ever truly considered her part of the family. The question stripped away every title between them. Anne answered that affection had never been the issue. Trust in the institution was. The queen consort pushed back her chair, wounded by the distinction, because Elizabeth had now made that difference permanent in writing. Anne then broke her silence through a recorded private conversation preserved with the memorandum. She revealed that the late queen feared Charles might slowly transfer ceremonial influence to his wife out of loyalty, gratitude, and love. Ceremonial influence meant the authority created through repeated public duties, access, and accepted custom, even when no law formally granted it. Once such influence became normal, William might struggle to reverse it without appearing cruel. Camilla accused the princess of assuming the worst. Anne answered that Elizabeth had not feared a sudden seizure of power. She had feared gradual change, each step small enough to defend, until the final result became impossible to undo. That explanation struck harder, because it described devotion as a danger rather than a virtue. Anne opened a drawer and placed the sealed memorandum beside the letter. It authorized her to challenge any expansion of Camilla's duties before it became royal precedent, meaning a repeated practice later treated as an accepted rule. The queen consort stared at both documents and finally understood that the boundary had been designed to survive Charles's resistance. The door opened before either woman could continue. Charles entered, saw his mother's letter beside Anne's memorandum, and stopped. Camilla turned toward him. The princess did not move. His silence now carried a choice neither woman intended to make easy. Charles now stood at the center of the conflict, yet the true power behind his decision belonged to rules and people that even the king could not simply dismiss. A crown can command rooms, shape ceremonies, and silence opposition, but it cannot erase every promise made before it was inherited. As Charles studied his mother's letter, he discovered that Elizabeth had constructed more than an emotional appeal. She had tied her wishes to the palace's internal machinery, placing Anne, William, and senior constitutional advisors around the decision, so that no private act of devotion could quietly undo it. Charles sat with the letter and memorandum before him, then slowly set down his pen. The restriction did not remove Camilla's title as queen consort. It drew boundaries around independent authority, access to state documents, succession briefings, and representation during a sovereign's incapacity. Incapacity meant a period when the monarch could not perform official duties because of illness or another serious condition. These limits mattered because temporary access could easily become permanent custom. William entered, knowing the decision would affect more than one marriage. As heir, he had a direct duty to protect the powers attached to the next reign. The prince understood that once Camilla began reviewing restricted state papers, or standing in for Charles during sensitive moments, removing those duties later could look personal and vindictive. What seemed temporary today could weaken his authority tomorrow. Charles admitted that obeying the instruction felt like betraying his wife. He had spent years defending her, rebuilding her public standing, and promising that she would never again be treated as an outsider. Now his mother's final command forced him to become the person who placed the strongest limit upon her. The king looked toward his son and asked whether duty truly required that kind of cruelty. William chose his words carefully. He answered that ignoring Elizabeth would betray the responsibility she had prepared both of them to inherit. A documented account of their private exchange recorded the future king saying that loyalty to family could not be allowed to rewrite the structure protecting the crown. Father and son were no longer arguing about affection. They were defending two different forms of it. The legal advisor then confirmed the full consequence. Several planned duties for Camilla, including reviewing restricted state papers during Charles's absence, had to be reassigned immediately. State papers were confidential government documents sent to the monarch for information, approval, or formal action. Allowing access would create exactly the kind of independent influence the letter was written to prevent. Anne had already prepared the revised schedule. It transferred sensitive responsibilities to William and public continuity duties to Catherine, proving that Elizabeth's safeguard had been designed for immediate enforcement. The princess had not waited for emotion to settle, because delay itself could become permission. Charles signed at last. The pen touched the page, and his decision became official. Yet before he could reach Camilla, the revised instructions had already been sent through the household. By the time Charles left the room, the machinery had already begun moving, and Camilla was about to discover what Elizabeth's boundary looked like in daily royal life. The fallout arrived without trumpets or public accusation. It came through missing folders, cancelled briefings, altered schedules, and doors that no longer opened at the expected hour. Camilla discovered that power inside the palace rarely disappears in one dramatic gesture. It is removed piece by piece, until a person suddenly recognizes that the routine surrounding them has changed, and that everyone else knew before they did. Camilla arrived for the scheduled briefing, expecting the same place she had occupied before. Instead, her name was gone from the attendance sheet. An aide quietly closed the folder she believed had been prepared for her, and no one offered an explanation. The queen consort remained in the doorway long enough to understand that this was not an error. The new boundary had already entered daily life. The change reached far beyond one meeting. Her ceremonial appearances would continue, allowing her to stand beside Charles at public events. But access to succession briefings, restricted red boxes, and discussions about the sovereign's temporary incapacity had been withdrawn. Red boxes were secure cases carrying confidential government papers for senior royals. Losing access mattered because it removed her from decisions closest to the operation and future of the crown. Catherine received several representational duties, while William assumed the state-related responsibilities Elizabeth had reserved for the direct line of succession. Representational duties meant attending important engagements on behalf of the monarch without exercising his legal authority. The future king understood why the distinction mattered. Public visibility could be shared, but constitutional influence could not be allowed to drift away from the heir. Camilla returned to her private room, carrying nothing. When Charles entered, she told him the palace had reduced her to a symbol, present when ceremony required warmth, absent when real decisions carried weight. The king tried to explain that her title, charities, and public role remained secure, but his words only deepened the wound. She had not fought for years merely to become decoration beside his reign. Charles reached for her hand, yet she pulled away. He admitted he could not reverse the schedule without openly rejecting his mother's instruction. That confession defeated them both. The monarch had gained the crown, but discovered that even his highest authority could not protect the woman he loved from the limits built around it. Then another passage from Elizabeth's letter circulated through the household in a documented briefing note. It stated that public affection must never be mistaken for constitutional dependence. The sentence made the judgment unmistakable. Popularity could earn respect, but it could not create powers that duty had placed elsewhere. Camilla expected William to be pleased. Instead, she learned that he had personally instructed the staff to handle every change with respect and prevent unnecessary humiliation. The prince was enforcing the boundary, but he was not seeking revenge. That restraint unsettled her anger and opened a path neither of them had expected. With her anger beginning to give way to exhaustion, Camilla agreed to meet the one person whose future had shaped Elizabeth's decision from the beginning. There were no secretaries in the room, no constitutional papers on the table, and no king present to protect either side from discomfort. William met Camilla privately, because the conflict could no longer be solved through schedules and sealed documents. She expected accusation. Instead, the future king offered a truth more painful and more compassionate. Elizabeth's letter was not written to erase Camilla, but to prevent love from becoming a substitute for duty. William spoke first. He explained that Elizabeth had separated Camilla's personal place beside Charles from the constitutional responsibilities that had to remain with the sovereign and direct heirs. Constitutional responsibilities were the official powers and duties connected to governing through the crown. The distinction mattered because a marriage could shape private life, but it could not decide who controlled the monarchy's future. Camilla listened without interrupting, though every sentence felt like another boundary closing around her. She reminded the prince that the family had accepted her publicly, trusted her beside the king, and allowed her to represent the institution for years. William acknowledged all of it. Acceptance was real, he said, but it had never guaranteed unrestricted authority over the next reign. Camilla finally asked whether he believed she would deliberately weaken his position. The question carried more hurt than anger. William paused before answering that intention was not the danger. Precedent was. A precedent meant one decision becoming an example used to justify similar powers later. The future king feared that small exceptions made out of love could become permanent claims his children would one day be forced to untangle. William then admitted that enforcing the letter also wounded Charles. A documented account of their private meeting recorded him saying that every restriction placed on Camilla felt to his father like another punishment for the life they had chosen together. Still, the prince refused to leave his own children a crown blurred by unresolved family loyalties. He would not pass confusion forward simply to avoid pain in the present. Camilla looked away when he revealed Elizabeth's final private instruction. During a recorded conversation held before her death, the Queen had told him to protect Camilla's dignity, while ensuring that the line between consort and sovereign was never crossed. A consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, someone who supports the crown without possessing the sovereign's independent authority. That revelation changed the meaning of the letter. Camilla understood that Elizabeth had not demanded her removal, humiliation, or exile from royal life. She had demanded acceptance of a respected but clearly limited place. The queen consort had not been erased. She had been defined. Camilla agreed to stop resisting the revised duties. William promised that no public statement would portray her acceptance as defeat. Yet the moment their private agreement reached the palace communications office, the family's hidden struggle became an official announcement ready for the world. What began as a sealed family judgment was now moving beyond palace walls, where one headline would define the public meaning of Camilla's painful acceptance. By sunrise, the secret letter had become the image Britain could not ignore. Television studios abandoned their planned coverage, newspapers rewrote their front pages, and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace beneath a sky crowded with cameras. Yet the public reaction was not simply about Camilla's loss. It was about Elizabeth's enduring authority, and the astonishing discovery that the late queen had prepared limits for a royal future she would never personally witness. The palace released its statement with carefully controlled language. Camilla would continue her ceremonial service, but constitutional and succession-related responsibilities would remain with Charles, William, and selected senior royals. Constitutional responsibilities meant duties connected to the lawful operation of the crown, while succession matters concerned who would inherit and protect the throne. The wording sounded restrained, yet everyone understood the emotional meaning. Her title remained. Her reach did not. Charles watched the first broadcast beside Camilla and reached for her hand. She turned away when the presenter described Elizabeth's letter as a final vote of limited confidence. The phrase struck harder than the official statement because it reduced years of service to one painful judgment. The king whispered that the public did not understand the full story, but the queen consort knew the words would define her before any explanation could catch up. Anne followed the coverage from another royal residence. She closed the television when a commentator called her the quiet victor of the struggle. The princess felt no triumph. Elizabeth's instruction had placed duty in her hands, but enforcing it had wounded her brother and exposed a family division to the nation. A documented account from her household recorded that she refused to celebrate a decision that had left everyone diminished. Then, one front page captured the entire storm. Beneath the headline, "Elizabeth's Last Line," the newspaper placed the sealed letter beside an image of Camilla leaving a palace engagement with her head lowered. Broadcasters repeated the phrase throughout the morning, turning a private boundary into a national symbol. The story was no longer about procedure. It had become a judgment on love, loyalty, and the limits of royal acceptance. Outside Buckingham Palace, a woman stepped through the gathering crowd and placed white flowers beside the gates. Her note read, "She protected the crown to the end." Others stopped to read it, and within minutes, the message appeared across television screens. The moment captured the public mood more powerfully than any debate. Sympathy for Camilla existed, but Elizabeth's authority still commanded deeper trust. Camilla heard the reaction and understood that silence would soon look like resistance. Charles urged caution, yet she knew the final choice belonged to her. She could fight publicly, withdraw completely, or accept the boundary in words no one could misunderstand. The nation had delivered its judgment on the letter, but the story could end only when Camilla decided what dignity would look like after defeat. Camilla's final response did not come through anger, retaliation, or another palace struggle. It came through a short statement placed beside the letter that had devastated her. She accepted the limits Elizabeth had written, reaffirmed her loyalty to Charles, and surrendered every contested responsibility without demanding compensation. In doing so, she lost the future role she had imagined, but preserved the dignity that could still define how history remembered her. Camilla signed the statement without hesitation. It confirmed that her role would remain beside the king through ceremonial duties, public service, and charitable causes, but without independent constitutional authority. That authority meant the legal power attached to the sovereign and direct heirs, not the personal influence of a royal spouse. The distinction mattered because it protected the future crown from decisions shaped by marriage rather than duty. Charles watched her place the signed page beside Elizabeth's letter. She told him that she would not force him to choose between their marriage and his mother's final command. The king had spent years trying to give her security, recognition, and protection from the rejection that once surrounded them. Now he understood that the crown could offer status, but it could never belong entirely to personal love. Charles embraced her and admitted that he had wanted to give her everything. Camilla answered that accepting less did not mean she had lost everything. She would still serve, still stand beside him, and still hold a respected place within the family. Her surrender was not weakness. It was the moment she chose dignity over another battle that could have damaged the monarchy they had both promised to support. Anne completed her duty without celebration. She returned the memorandum to the royal archives, rather than keeping it as a symbol of personal authority. The princess understood that enforcement had been the purpose, not victory. By sealing the document again, she showed that Elizabeth's instruction had reached its end, and that no further punishment was required. William met Camilla privately once more, and thanked her for accepting the boundary. A documented account of their conversation recorded the prince assuring her that respect within the family had not disappeared. She had not been removed from royal life. She had simply accepted the clear line between consort and sovereign, allowing the future king to inherit a crown free from unresolved claims. Catherine would now carry representational continuity, Anne would provide internal oversight, and William would protect succession matters whenever Charles could not act personally. The structure was settled. No rivalry remained hidden beneath uncertain duties. Elizabeth's letter did not destroy Camilla's role. It defined it. Her devastation became acceptance, Charles's guilt became understanding, and Anne's burden became fulfilled duty. The monarchy survived because every person finally accepted that loyalty to the crown sometimes demanded painful limits. The private letter closed one painful chapter with unmistakable finality. Love could stand beside the crown, but it could never be permitted to command it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.